Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the key business news stories you need to know about from right across the continent. Let's start though with a run through the markets. Some pretty interesting news coming through on the Kenyan front. Two banks are thinking of merging. CBA Bank and NIC. On paper, if you combine their two assets, you're looking at an asset base of over 400 billion shillings at current prices. If they actually merge at this point, you're looking at the third largest lender in the entire East African region. Will it still happen? We're not sure. That entire deal is still waiting for shareholder and regulatory approval. We'll certainly keep a very close eye on it for you. NIC shares were up about 0.7 in trading today. Here's what's coming up tonight. Oil prices fall as OPEC hint of an agreement to cut production. Last-minute talk saves Zimbabwe's largest miller from shutting down. And Nigeria unveils the cheapest smartphone in the market. All right, then let's start today where we don't normally start, with commodities. Oil prices snapped lower on Thursday morning after Saudi Arabia's oil minister Khalid Al-Falih said that a cut of 1 million barrels a day would be enough for OPEC and its allied oil producers, OPEC Plus if you will. Now the influential cartel is meeting at its headquarters in Vienna in Austria with the aim of reaching an accord over production levels over the next 6 months. The biggest producer in OPEC, Saudi Arabia, has been leading calls for the group to trim its output amid surging supply and fears that an economic slowdown will essentially cut fuel demand. The oil-rich kingdom had indicated previously that it wanted the group to cut output by at least 1.3 million barrels of crude a day. However, the Saudi energy minister said that a cut of 1 million barrels would be sufficient. His comments, of course, did cause prices to slide. Now, that two-day OPEC Plus meeting comes as energy-reliant economies look to boost flagging prices. Some in the Middle East appear more exposed than others, as Jacob Greaves now explains from Dubai.
$50 a barrel. That's a figure suddenly being given more serious thought. OPEC is attempting to find consensus on how and if they'll try prop up the slumping oil price. But regardless, it's raised the question of which Gulf hydrocarbon heavyweights can survive on slimmed-down energy revenues. The lower oil price might prompt memories of the 2014 fall. That shook oil and gas-dependent economies across the region, from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to here in the UAE. Since then, there's been many attempts to better prepare balance sheets for any such eventuality. The question is how successful they've been. Analysis from research firm Capital Economics suggests some have better managed their exposure than others.
Some countries have quite big fiscal buffers, the likes of Kuwait, UAE, Qatar. So even with oil at 40-50, they would be able to weather this quite well and even loosen policy a bit if they felt their economies needed a bit of support. Saudi Arabia is one we're a bit more concerned about. They need oil to be around $80 to $90 a barrel to run a balanced budget. With oil at 40-50, the budget deficit is more like 10% of GDP. So the scope for fiscal loosening there is almost non-existent, and if anything, fiscal austerity might come back onto the agenda.
In that context, it's perhaps little surprise Saudi Arabia is increasingly becoming a cheerleader of OPEC cuts. But there's other members of the Gulf Cooperation Council already facing economic headwinds, likely to be more buffeted by a prolonged price slump.
We think the weakest links in the GCC remain Oman and Bahrain. Indeed, their fiscal break-even prices are closer to the $100 mark. For Bahrain, it's around $106 for next year. For Oman, it's just hovering less than $90. So where all prices are trading, and with credit rating agencies already precipitously downgrading these sovereigns, our concerns going into next year is that a lot more fiscal consolidation needs to happen for these two countries in order to stem any further pressures on their rating profile.
In this energy-dominated landscape, few can ignore a falling oil price, but it may not burn every Gulf producer as it once did. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
All right then, so as I mentioned a little earlier, OPEC, non-OPEC oil producers meeting in Vienna to decide on the next course of action. CGTN's Guy Henderson has been monitoring all the action from that city. He joins us now live from Vienna. So Guy, OPEC members do agree that they need to cut oil supply, but where was there so much disagreement on how much supply needs to be taken off the market?
Yeah, a couple of different reasons, I think, Ramah. Firstly, disagreements between OPEC members and non-OPEC members. Now, remember that increasingly OPEC is having to cooperate with other major oil producers outside OPEC in order for any attempts to sort of try and control and stabilize the oil price to actually be effective. They don't have the same stranglehold on the global oil price as they once had. OPEC's been saying that all of these countries, OPEC and non-OPEC major oil producers, should all be sort of sharing the burden when it comes to tightening supply and trying to rebalance that oversupply in the market. And then you have a lot of non-OPEC members led by Russia who are saying, well, it was OPEC members, specifically Saudi Arabia, that was leading the cry to open the taps and increase supply through the summer, and that therefore they should now be bearing the brunt now that, you know, this rebalancing is required. So that's number one reason. Number two, there is this pressure coming from outside, from the United States, on OPEC countries, on particularly Saudi Arabia. We heard from the Saudi oil minister earlier, as he walked in, Khalid Al-Faleh said that Riyadh does not take instructions from other countries when deciding what to do about you know, the oil price and how much oil it should be producing. But we have had continued pressure from US President Donald Trump saying he wants low oil prices. He does not want a deal to be made here in Vienna. And at the moment, the Saudis you know, are relying on the United States to support them in the face of potential, certainly a couple of months ago. Perhaps those are the reasons why, in the end, he came up with a suggestion of a sort of reduced cut that, as I think you've already mentioned, hasn't really impressed the oil markets.
Indeed, and the prices are looking pretty bad at the moment. Brent is under $60 a barrel. But Guy, let me go back to something you mentioned. Before this meeting, Qatar, a marginal oil producer, fairly big LNG exporter in the world, they announced that they would be leaving OPEC altogether. But given that, and what you've mentioned, that reliance that OPEC has on non-OPEC members, especially Russia, in order to deal with supply, I mean, is the cartel meeting today and asking itself if it actually even still matters?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say about Qatar, I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. When it comes to oil, you know, it's a small oil producer. It's leaving OPEC to focus on its natural gas supplies. And so when it comes to things like the production cut, you know, Qatar leaving doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on that. There has, though, been a question around whether Qatar's exit might encourage other members, for example, perhaps Iraq, to sort of up sticks and leave OPEC as well. However, yes, I think that there is an increasing question around how effective OPEC can be, because it now has to cooperate with non-OPEC members, and that can be a challenge. But also the fact that the United States is now not just a massive consumer of oil, it has become the largest producer of oil over the course of the past couple of years as well. So while OPEC has managed to some extent to bring in some major oil producers that are outside OPEC, led by Russia, as you say, it has really no control, or much less control, over what the United States does as a major oil producer, and you know, that therefore asks big questions as to what this group can do to control the price of oil. And that is a new reality, of course. Not much chance that the United States is going to come along to these kind of meetings. Indeed.
Well, it certainly isn't 1973 anymore, isn't it? Guy Henderson there live, of course, for us in Vienna. Now, as I mentioned, oil prices down to about $59 a barrel. That's essentially Brent crude futures at the moment, down about 10% compared to where they started the year from. We'll keep a close eye on that and update you as the hour rolls on. On to Egypt now. It's one of the most affected nations by these rising oil prices. Here's CGTN's Yasser Kim taking a look at how the country's economy and government is struggling to deal with this shift.
Egypt produces only 660 barrels of oil per day, but consumes 800,000. The difference is imported at international prices. The government subsidies energy, and the bill for oil subsidies alone is about $7 billion a year, which is why any fluctuations in international oil prices affect the budget.
Every time there's a $1 increase in oil prices, it raises the subsidy bill by $200 million. So imagine the impact it had when the oil price jumped from $67 to $80 a barrel. The only way to cover the difference was to cut subsidies, and that's what the government did.
Reducing energy subsidies increases the price of electricity and fuel. It has a knock-on effect, hiking the cost of basic items and adding to the financial budget and burden of low-income earners. But the latest drop in international oil prices does not mean the government grants will be reinstated, as many Egyptians had hoped.
The subsidy cuts are part of an economic reform plan approved by the IMF, so the government will continue with them. But if oil prices stay low, then the money the state has saved will be spent on other services such as healthcare, education, and importing basic necessities.
Recently, Egypt's economy has received a major boost with the discovery of huge reserves of natural gas. The country is now self-sufficient in natural gas and is aiming to become a major exporter.
Being self-sufficient means you're no longer importing, so there's less expenditure in the budget. And with the liquefaction plants in Edfu and Damietta, Egypt is becoming a regional hub, which will provide a source of hard currency to balance out the import and subsidy bills.
The government is closely monitoring international oil prices, hoping it will remain below the $60 mark as it's forecast in the latest 2018-2019 budget. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Last-minute discussions between National Foods and Zimbabwe Central Bank have averted the closure of the country's biggest single flour mill. National Foods had planned on suspending flour production entirely on Wednesday after failing to secure enough foreign currency to pay its suppliers. With the details, here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya.
A bleak Christmas with fewer loaves of bread and cakes on the shelves has been averted, but Zimbabwe's economy is still at risk from a currency crisis. National Foods was on the brink due to a crippling shortage of US dollars that has hampered international payments for raw materials and other essential imports. The situation is particularly bad now in the wake of a clampdown on parallel market dealing as government seeks to prop up its fixed 1-to-1 rate between bond notes and the greenback.
Unfortunately, there is no mechanism that has been set up to allow those that have the US dollars to trade with those that require them. And unfortunately, what we actually had was an introduction of a law that makes it illegal for any trade of the two currencies. So essentially, businesses are now concerned that they are now doing illegal activities if they continue in business. So what could happen is we could have even more companies closing if we do not introduce a measure to allow this trade.
Reluctant to offload at the official rate, holders of hard currency and anxious business leaders have called for an end to the central bank-managed currency allocation system and for monetary authorities to allow the exchange rate to float.
The concerns have been that will that rate not keep running? But we believe that it will not, because it's currently government, because a lot of it has been to do with liquidity that's been created in the market. And the government over the last month, there was a surplus reported. So if in that case, we are no longer going to have additional liquidity being created by government. So this rate will only run to the extent that there is liquidity on the market to chase the few US dollars.
Finance Minister Professor Mutuli Ncube has said he intends to drastically reduce government borrowing, which has fueled excessive money supply and crowded out the private sector. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Right, then let's start with Steinhoff, where a probe into accounting irregularities at that firm and the release of the retailer's restated results has been delayed again. and that has sent its shares down by as much as 21% in today's trading session. Now, the company is engulfed in one of South Africa's biggest single corporate scandals. It says it has been forced to abandon plans to publish both its 2017 and 2018 financial statements by the end of January next year. Steinhoff is citing delays to a forensic investigation being carried out by auditors PricewaterhouseCoopers. More than a third of the companies listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange have collectively shed over $143 million in provisional and final results so far announced in 2018. On the other hand, banks have posted a total of $856 million in profits, revealing the massive disconnect between the borrowing side of the economy and the lending institutions. The profit-shedding firms have cited a very challenging business environment and a persistent credit crunch that has sustained pressure on their ability to grow returns and avoid job cuts. Internal emails at Facebook, including those involving the CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, have been published online by a committee of UK lawmakers investigating social media's role in the spread of fake news. The documents had been sealed by a court in California, but they led lawmakers to conclude that Facebook undertook deals with third-party apps that continued to allow access to personal data of the company's users. And the Russian internet giant Yandex has launched its first ever smartphone in a highly anticipated move into hardware that builds on popular service apps. The company behind the most widely used search engine in Russia and the ex-Soviet region has recently diversified to defend its market share against Google. The new device is called the Yandex Phone. It runs on Android. It will go on sale on Thursday in Russia and online for about $270. It's less than similar phones from competitors Apple and Samsung. That's a run through your company headlines. We're taking a short break on the program. There's plenty more content coming up. We'll introduce you to a French tech firm that looks to ease the provision of medical services across Africa. And Tunisia wants to spend $27 million boosting its exports. We'll tell you how next.
As we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is CGTN. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
back to the program. Let's talk about medicine, specifically the intersection of tech and medicine. Tech Care for All is a French meditech company that has now launched operations in East Africa, setting up shop in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. It has, however, also partnered with a Kenyan digital solutions firm, Savannah Informatics, to provide digital medical services. Now, this new venture is looking to be a key contributor in East Africa's quest to achieve universal healthcare. There's a bit of a theme for governments in the region this year. Tech Care is also operating in the Indian and the West African markets with a base in Senegal. The company marries tech with the transformation of local health ecosystems across both the public and private health sectors. So let's dig a little deeper into what exactly this offers. About e-health quite a bit, but try and quantify this for me in commercial terms and also in terms of health outcomes. How big is the opportunity here?
When you think about, we haven't really looked at it with the region or in Africa, done really great analysis. But if you look at it globally, in 2017, the estimate was that telemedicine is worth about $21 billion US. We believe a quite significant chunk of that could actually be existing in our markets, especially in Africa. Think of Kenya is a hub for Africa. So it's quite a huge opportunity, and it's actually a virgin market that is yet to be tapped into.
There's, as I understand it, your business is built around three things. So there's a peer-to-peer learning model, there's telemedicine, and then there's a component that deals with electronic health records, but it's not just getting the records, it's also analyzing them and gaining insights they can then act upon. But what's the business model here? Where are the revenue streams? Who's buying these services? Who ends up paying for what?
Okay. I think our business is not purely just the technology. Our perspective of the business is, and our perspective of the problem is that we do have a lot of solutions. We don't have a shortage of health solutions in the country. We don't have a shortage of health solutions and technological solutions on the globe. But our focus is the people. So if we have the solutions, if we're able to have the technologies, it's a matter of figuring out how do they solve the real problems that the people are facing, the problems that the patients, the doctors, the nurses, every stakeholder is facing. So how we view it is once we are able to solve a problem, then we'll definitely be able to commercialize and make some money out of it. But as a social impact, as a social enterprise, our focus first is the people. We believe as we focus on the people, as we solve those problems, there will definitely be ways of commercializing and generating revenues from the different solutions.
There's something I always find interesting when you look at these two Venn diagrams, health on one end and tech on the other, because in Africa today, at least by the end of last year, we had about 444 odd million mobile subscribers, and these are, they're packed with a lot of tech. You've got gyro sensors in there, you've got sensors that can tell you what your heartbeat is, what your blood pressure is, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of tech out there, but given the fact that you have quite a bit of mobile penetration, why hasn't telemedicine taken off, at least within Africa?
And you're definitely right. Actually, we've scanned the sector, we've scanned the region, and we've seen it's not that we have a shortage of solutions. It's not that we don't have enough solutions for example, telemedicine. The challenge we have is we do have a number of solutions that are unable to scale. Health is very, very unique. So just having one solution that may work in one context or one solution that may work between the doctor and the patient, you try to scale it up to be a solution that can have public health impact. That becomes difficult because of...
Give me an example.
So for example, let's think of a telemedicine solution.
Yeah.
So how people do it in the very rudimentary manner is where I can call my doctor and I can talk to my doctor. However, then it gets to, when you think about medicine, becomes more complicated. The doctor needs to see me. The doctor needs to examine the patient and understand what is the challenge. So when you think about it, then that brings other issues that now you need to have connectivity that can actually support just the video and sending images. Again, times you need to touch the patient, you need to examine the patient.
And also there's a bit of a capital question as well, because like if I want to get accurate readings on blood pressure, heart rates and so on and so forth, that essentially requires a bit of a capital investment either on the part of the hospital or the potential patient to be able to relay that information in real time if you want to do telediagnostics.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of the infrastructure you need is pretty expensive.
Right.
A lot of the focus has been in hospitals and not really in telemedicine, when you design the diagnostics and the solutions.
Right. Okay. So one last question for you, because I'm particularly interested in the e-health record side of it. Right now, for many an African country, data protection laws just don't exist. Right? Completely. They do not exist. And this is the sort of information that, depending on your perspective, is either a massive gold mine for medical research, or it's a privacy nightmare for some individuals. So once you have this information in place, what sort of legal protections apply? What can you do with it? What can you not do with it?
You are absolutely right too. In Kenya, what happens, and more so even the region, a lot of the innovations move very fast, and the regulation now has to play catch up. So what we've realized is that, well, we do have regions across the globe whereby a lot of the solutions and technology has been in use for long, and they have been able to improve on their regulation. So, like for example, if you go to the US, there is what they call the Hipaa Act, or the Hipaa way of looking at data protection. But at the very basic, the first thing we say we believe in is that the confidentiality of the patient at no way or any form should it be compromised. So we have very strong measures, again, some of them borrowing from the more developed countries, and then again, in addition, when we bring them to our local context, we ensure that they also are able to, they're aligned to our local regulatory framework, which we still, it's a space we are looking to see how do we contribute to ensuring that Kenya is able to catch up, and that we are able to protect data, we are able to have the integrity of the data secured, and that confidentiality of the patient is well secured.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Benson, CEO for East Africa, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time. All right then, so let's talk about Kenya Commercial Bank. It is essentially Kenya's largest bank by assets. It's announced an investment plan of about $487 million aimed at promoting a lot more youth entrepreneurs right across the East African economy. The lender plans to use these funds to finance entrepreneurs under its various youth enterprise flagship programs that does train young people in various locations before then investing a bit of capital in their business ventures. The bank targets to create 250,000 jobs in 5 years for young Kenyans through this program. In 2018, KCB disbursed a total of $183 million in debt financing to SMEs through this initiative, which seeks to formalize a largely informal part of the economy.
This Ajira program has already started over 23,000 youth who have been trained, and over 2,000 youth micro-business enterprises have since been created. To empower our youth is a feat that is worth emulating by all. Further, I wish to acknowledge the contribution of the program to the realization of my administration's Big Four agenda, the Foundation's promotion of agribusiness for the youth in innovative agricultural practices, such as hydroponic farming, providing agri-produce aggregation, and commercial off-takers in local and export markets, resonate with the food security goal that we have set as an administration.
Our young people are very ambitious. They are driven. They have also proven to us over time and again that if they are given the chance and support, they have the capacity to transform not just our country, but also transform the entire world. So that's why we launched this program in 2016 as a catalyst to be able to build small micro enterprises, and each of them was targeted to employ between 5 and 10 people in the next 3 to 5 years. And today we have trained over 30,000 of these businesses. For us, we intend in the next 3 to 5 years to build enterprises to create 1 million direct jobs for our economy.
From East Africa to North Africa now, where Tunisia's budget for export promotion is expected to go all the way up to about $27 million in 2019 and grow even further to $34 million in 2020. Now compare that to this year's number, $13.5 million. Significant increase all the way across the board. Authorities are planning to give state agencies a lot more scope to boost exports to non-traditional markets. As CGTN's Adin Chuachi now reports.
The North African country boasts nearly 6,000 products in more than 150 destinations on the international market.
Currently, the European Union, with its 500 million consumers, is our main economic and commercial partner. At more than 75%, the EU accounts for the lion's share of Tunisia's exports.
According to data from the Export Promotion Center, trade over the first 10 months of the year has increased 20.4%.
The improvement is a result of the economy's performance, the depreciation of the dinar against major currencies, the improvement in agriculture and market services, and the hike in international energy prices.
Exports to traditional markets in Europe, the Maghreb and Asia have risen by 4%.
Exports of organic products have increased by 43%, particularly olive oil, which contributes around $146 million, or a quarter of total exports.
The Export Promotion Center says plans to diversify products under the Made in Tunisia vision will result in a label recognized not only in the region, but the whole world.
Due to logistical challenges, Tunisia's commercial transactions with sub-Saharan Africa make up less than 2% of total trade. It is something the country is hoping to address, along with increasing exports to the Maghreb region. Adon Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
On to Uganda now, where legislators have apparently vetoed a government proposal to issue a new East African passport and phase out the existing travel documents. In a very heated session in Parliament, legislators raised questions about the legality of this new passport as well as the new costs. CGTN's Michael Baleke filed this report.
The first batch of newly introduced East African e-passports arrived in Uganda this week. They are due to be distributed this month, but the planned rollout has hit a snag as legislators raise concerns over the legitimacy of the process.
There is no way how a government can come up with an arrangement without involving all stakeholders, because it means a lot. There are those with passports which are still running up to 2030. There are those with passports that are remaining with 5 years to expire.
It is a global trend. It is a regional demand. Like in East Africa, I think we committed to change over. But I think what the institution of immigration has not done properly is the timing. And two, well knowing that it has a cost implication.
According to government, the new East African e-passports will have chips containing electronically processed biometric information about the holder. The current machine-readable passports only hold traditional text information, a photo and ghost image. The 6-member East African community has set January 2021 as the deadline for phasing out the traditional passports. But legislators here say the process in Uganda has been rushed. Parliament has ruled that the whole process be reviewed.
Have you signed a protocol with other East African community countries? Are you having the same commencement date? Why are you putting Ugandans and holding them at ransom?
The new e-passports are expected to cost between $70 and $130 more than the old documents. The government has asked for time to look into the MP's concerns. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
On to South Africa now, where the public enterprises ministers announced emergency plans to prevent further power rationing in the country. Remember, South Africa, Africa's most industrialized economy, is in the middle of a fairly nasty power crisis at the moment. There has been a consistent supply of power rather, for 6 consecutive days. Pravin Gordhan, the public enterprises minister, has further addressed other issues facing the utility, like its enormous amounts of outstanding debt. The management team had earlier on presented the utility's dim interim financial results to the public and called for assistance from the government to help keep it financially viable. Eskom executives say that they have a detailed action plan which aims to resolve their challenges.
Instructions to Eskom is get this load shedding out of the way as soon as you can, move from load level 2 to level 1 as soon as you can, and we'll keep the public better informed about what is going on in that particular regard. Secondly, clearly the coal problem is one, but ultimately we have to find solutions for the debt that Eskom has, but also this imbalance, as I was explaining, between cost and revenue. And the country should participate in that debate. Thirdly, we've given you some idea of the outlines of an action plan in terms of deployment of skills, careful inspection of power stations, timelines, responsibility, accountability, and consequences. And that will be finalized shortly, and the elements of it are already being put in place. Fourth, I think Eskom must become, and all 40,000 people in Eskom must become a lot more aware of the responsibility that we have to 60 million citizens on the one hand, and the economy on the other hand.
Now, Djibouti will resume providing port services to South Sudan following the restoration of peace in the country. The CEO of Djibouti's Durale Multipurpose Port, Wahib Daher Aden, said that they would also be providing services to Burundi and Rwanda. The MP started operations in June 2017. It expanded rather rapidly. Djibouti has in the last 10 years built 5 new ports and a rail connection with Ethiopia at a fairly steep cost. DMP is a game changer in the industry. It's the most efficient port in that part of the world. It also does serve quite a bit of Ethiopian traffic. A newly constructed electric rail line connecting Djibouti to Ethiopia will be linked to DMP in 2 months. Once that is fully operational, goods from DMP will reach Ethiopia's Mojodrai port, some 76 kilometers east of Addis Ababa, within 12 hours. There's more content coming up. Time for a short break, though. Here's what's coming up next. China is demanding the unconditional release of Huawei's CFO by Canadian authorities. And Cubans are set to access the internet for the first time from their mobile phones.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are 2 of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Rwanda, where the High Court in the capital, Kigali, has acquitted government critic Diana Rwigara and her mother on charges of inciting insurrection and forgery. The 35-year-old businesswoman was arrested in September 2017. She was the only female candidate who sought to contest for the presidency in August of the same year. U.S. senators had in recent days urged the Rwandan government to drop the charges against her. Burundi has ordered the United Nations Human Rights Council to shut down its office in the country within 2 months. Last month, Burundi boycotted an East African Community Summit that was meant to focus on Burundi's ongoing political crisis. In 2017, Burundi left the International Criminal Court after it launched an investigation into the alleged atrocities in the country. A wave of violence started there in 2015 when President Pierre Nkurunziza said he would run for a third term in office. Libya's Electoral Commission says the country will hold a referendum on a new constitution in 2019. Now, that announcement signals Libya's first concrete step towards restoring unity and political stability. It follows last month's adoption by Parliament in eastern Libya of an election law that would govern the referendum and future polls. A 60-member panel drafted the constitution and submitted it to legislators back in August. And finally, the UN has started a series of consultations with traditional and religious leaders in Africa on ending cultural and religious norms that are harmful to girls. The first phase of consultation started in Nigeria, where an estimated 23 million girls have been married off as child brides. The consultations will propose a framework for next year's Africa Union Summit on ending child marriage and female genital mutilation. That's a run through your headlines. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has voiced its opposition to the arrest of Huawei's chief financial officer in Vancouver, in Canada. It's also asking for her immediate release. Earlier on, the Chinese embassy in Canada also said that Meng Wanzhou committed no crime. It says her arrest on Saturday was a violation of her rights. China is urging Canada and the US to, quote, immediately correct the wrongdoing, end of quote, and properly explain her detention. Meng was taken into custody at the request of the United States, which is now seeking her extradition. Huawei says it is unaware of any wrongdoing by its CFO. Meng is the daughter of Huawei founder Rang Zhengfei.
The Chinese authorities provided consular assistance to Meng once learning about the case. China has made solemn representations to the Canadian and American sides, demanding them to immediately clarify the reasons for the detention and release the detainee, as well as safeguard Meng's legitimate rights and interests.
Cuba's state telephone company will, for the first time, allow mobile phone consumers to get access to the internet through a new 3G network. Now, that will be very welcome news to many Cuban citizens who live in a country that is said to be one of the world's least connected. Now, the promise of wide mobile access to the internet comes more than a year after Google helped to boost internet speeds on the island nation, installing service through a deal with the state provider Etexa. Cubans will now need to pay the equivalent of about $7 for 600 megabytes of data, or $10 for 1 gigabyte and $30 for 4 gigabytes. The cost of access for data, though, does pose quite a barrier in a country where nearly 60% of the population lives on $100 or less every month.
It's good, it's affordable as long as the speed of the connection is good and you can get what you need quickly. I think it's a pretty good option.
What we need is the state communications company to really have the technical capabilities to provide the service with stability, not like what happened with the test that they did a while ago, where their servers collapsed. If they have the technical capacity and can maintain the service with a price that can be reduced reasonably, because our internet service may be one of the most expensive in the world, it may be a good option.
President Donald Trump's administration is signaling its opposition to electric cars and renewable fuel subsidies. At the same time, though, American officials are hosting an event designed to promote fossil fuels at the UN Climate Change Conference in Katowice in Poland. From Washington, here's CGTN's Daniel Regis.
The president's chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, says the Trump administration is opposed to tax credits which help boost sales of electric cars and promotes renewable energy, including solar and wind. The statement carried a clear political purpose: to distance this current White House from the pro-green energy policies of the previous Obama administration. But the power to change tax credits and subsidies rests with the US Congress, where some lawmakers actually favor increasing incentives for electric car makers. Even many Republicans seem unwilling to expend much political capital on this particular issue in the remainder of the congressional session and before Democrats take control of the House of Representatives in January. The Democrats are more supportive of green energy subsidies. Meanwhile, at the UN climate conference in Poland, US officials have been tasked with planning an event to promote fossil fuels, including coal. The aim is to showcase industry technologies that can reduce harmful gas emissions in those sources. It's being seen by many environmentalists gathered at the summit as a deliberate provocation and in line with President Trump's decision to abandon the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Daniel Wrenches, CGTN, Washington.
In the meantime, a group of scientists says that the world this year is set to see the biggest jump in carbon dioxide emissions compared to the last few years. That announcement comes as UN climate talks to continue in the Polish city of Katowice. The US President Donald Trump says he does not believe in climate change. No surprises over there, but as CGTN's Dan Williams reports, it has already taken its toll on American farmers.
From brutally freezing winters to boiling hot summer days, the US state of Illinois must prepare for both weather extremes. But the weather patterns for this region appear to be changing. A recent scientific report issued by 13 federal agencies laid out the devastating effects climate change will have on the economy, health, and the environment. For the Midwest, a key agricultural region, the report predicts an increase in crop failures, primarily because of extreme heat, drought and flooding. Jim Angel is the Illinois state climatologist and one of the report's authors.
The key findings, at least for the Midwest, are the big impacts that we're seeing on agriculture already, and then we're going to see even more in the future. And those are big economic impacts. Obviously, anytime you're messing with the food supply of not only the U.S., but the world, that can have major impacts around the region.
For Midwest farmers, the higher temperatures would likely add further stress to soil erosion, plant disease, and an increase in pests.
This farm in central Illinois enjoyed a bumper harvest this year, but there have already been signs over the last few years that climate change is beginning to have an impact.
Lynn Warfel has farmed here for 56 years. Although he remains sceptical over the cause of climate change, he has noticed the effects.
When it rains, it pours. And so this land is really flat, too flat. So when we get a 3 or 4 inch rain, we have flooding. And none of our crops like to be underwater. They can stand a little bit, but not for very long. And then the yield drops, or they even die.
The report says improvements in technology and science have so far largely insulated farming from the effects of climate change. But for how long?
At some point, I think it's going to break down. And then I'm very concerned, because when you look at the food supplies of the U.S. and the world, we don't carry over that much from one year to the next. So when we get in a drought year, the next year the supplies are fairly tight. So if we have multiple bad years, that's when it's going to really be a large impact, not only on the U.S., but on the world markets.
There is still hope. Angel says making efforts to reduce greenhouse gases can still reduce the severity of the impact. The question, though, is whether those efforts will be made. Dan Williams, CGTN, Tolono, Illinois.
The desire to lift China out of poverty is at the heart of the country's ambitious reform and opening up policy. Now, that has been a success so far, but the government says no stone should be left unturned and no village forgotten. CGTN's Lindy Mtangana visited Disagreements village in Hipaa province to figure out how art and ancient culture are bringing prosperity to small towns.
Sun Shunqiang is a craftsman. His speciality, the juma, or bamboo horse, an ancient craft he learnt from his father. The past and the present seem to coexist here in Disagreements, a village that is proud of its cultural heritage.
This village dates back to the Shang dynasty. It was built 3,000 years ago and it's rich in culture and history.
In ancient times, Disagreements was an important center of trade and commerce. But despite its cultural significance, over the years, the village itself remained poor.
In the past, the roads were muddy, and when it rained, it was impossible to pass. But now the roads and homes have been rebuilt, and many historical sites too. So the environment, the living standards, and our cultural literacy have improved.
It's no coincidence that these improvements have coincided. In fact, authorities in Dajiejian intentionally invested in art and history to drive development. In the last decade, Dajiejian has been given new life as a cultural tourism destination.
Our former party secretary attached great importance to the protection of culture and historic sites in the village. Under his leadership, we protected and restored many cultural and historic sites. This has continued under our incumbent secretary. In 2014, we started to invest in a cultural village with traditional culture as a key characteristic.
China's Craftsman Valley and Cultural Innovation Village is still under construction, with Phase 1 open to visitors. But once complete, it will boast an art gallery, a library, a concert hall, artist residence and a hotel, all integrated with the village's natural beauty. It's being built by the Yongxiangju Group, developers who have a strong belief in the power of the arts.
We believe in using art and culture to help guide people to learn and discover beauty. Through our different projects, villagers can broaden their horizons beyond what they have learned from books.
The investment in art has created jobs and opportunities. Even the younger generation is choosing Dajiejian over big cities like Beijing.
I love the atmosphere of this village. So after graduation, I chose to return, to stay and work here. I want to contribute my strengths to the development of Dajiejian.
China has in the past relied heavily on industry and manufacturing to address poverty, but Dajiejian to uplift its people and develop a community. Lindim Tongana, CGTN, Dajiejian, Hebei Province, China.
Right, and before we run into the break, a quick run through commodity prices. I'm going to focus on oil, essentially looping back to what we started the program with. So at the moment, in the last couple of seconds, Brent crude has actually fallen past this level. 59.57 is the current number. That brings the loss so far today to about 3.22% on that particular contract. Absolutely no agreement in Vienna on what to cut, when to cut, and who should bear the burden of that. In fact, the way the Saudi oil minister put it, not everyone, in his words, is ready to cut equally, and that does seem to be the sticking point. We'll keep you updated on the talks as they continue later on tomorrow with non-OPEC members. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be taking a look at the cheapest smartphone available in Nigeria when we come back.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Let's take it to Nigeria now to take a look at a relatively cheap smartphone that's meant to alleviate poverty and improve the lives of communities in rural areas. But of course, the question ultimately is, how do you succeed to provide affordable smartphones to millions at a price that's a fraction of those of the average smartphone in the market. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has some answers tonight on Grassroots.
The unveiling of Oyi One, which loosely translated means number one friend. At 1,000 naira or $2.7, it's Nigeria's most affordable smartphone. It's the brainchild of software engineer John Eno, whose aim is to dramatically increase access to mobile phones in Nigeria's rural areas. The phone comes with pre-installed apps that disseminate vital information on health, education, and financial services. The information on the phone is expected to help improve health in rural communities, besides bettering the livelihoods by providing simple tips on farming and market information. Beep2, the Nigerian company that circulates the phones, will then charge government, NGOs and private companies for aiding seamless distribution of the information to target communities.
We have removed the cost of the phone from the end user and put it back to the business for the business to pay back the money used to manufacture the phone. So in terms of breaking even, it's going to be very, very fast, definitely.
Nigeria is Africa's biggest market for the mobile phone industry. Latest survey by the Communications Commission shows at least 165 million SIM cards are actively in use. Unlike the conventional smartphones, Oyi One phones are capable of detecting nano-satellite signals where mobile network is patchy.
We are actually working with our partner who is manufacturing the nano-satellite specifically for rural connectivity, where people will be connected in rural area where there are no regular GSM network. So the nano-satellite will be complementing and providing an alternative network for that at an affordable rate.
According to the African Development Bank, about 152 million Nigerians live on less than $2 a day. That represents 80% of the country's population. Beep2 is targeting with the cheapest smartphones. It will be the most ambitious attempt at closing the infrastructural gap with smartphones equipped to improve rural lives beyond enabling calls and messages. The concept has already attracted interest from the Nigerian government and several other international donor agencies like UK-based DFID. Beep2 Communications Company has